I am super excited to have a jam fest with my friend Elizabeth DiAlto from Wild Soul Movement and Untamed the Wild Soul podcast. So those of you who heard Elizabeth and I jamming on her podcast, many of you have written in, and many of you are women in our communities, about us jamming on other topics. So for those of you who have not been in a jam session with Elizabeth and I, you're in for a treat. And this will most likely be a longer episode than usual. So you can either do it in one sitting, it'll probably be at least an hour, because I don't think we've ever had a conversation that's been under an hour together, socially or professionally. So you're in for a treat. So get cozy, get some tea, put your feet up, and let's dive into a whole bunch of different topics. I think that I want to start with surrender and release.
Yeah.
So tell me about surrendering and releasing.
So how many years ago is it now? It's 2017. So 3.5 years ago, when I was really coming into this juncture in my life where, and I'm sure people listening can relate to this, Terri, I'm sure you can relate to this, where you have so much potential. Like, you know, you're smart, you know that you have so much to offer the world, you have such a desire to help, but you're not really in your lane yet. And that is becoming painful. Like, you know, you're here for something important, and it's not about the significance of it, but you're like, I'm not doing what I'm here to do.
Right.
And so I'm telling you a story to explain the significance of surrender and release. I was listening to a book by Sonia Choquette called Ask Your Guides. Mm-hmm. And I was on a road trip up the coast of California from Laguna Beach up to Santa Barbara. And this was actually when I was on my way back from Santa Barbara. I stop in Malibu and I'm on the beach and I'm basically having this conversation with, at the time I wasn't super clear on my spirituality, who or what I was talking to, I wasn't sure, but whatever was out there. Mm-hmm. And I had this massive moment of surrender, being like, listen, I don't know. I need some help here, but I'm so willing. I'm so able, and I want to. So please just show me. And that, for me, was one of my biggest moments of surrender. And then about 3 weeks after that, the idea for what has become my flagship program and the core that all of my work has been built around, which is my Wild Soul Movement program, the idea for that came in. And then I beta tested that for 6 months and eventually came up with these 4 topics. Surrender and release is the first topic, because I looked at, in my own experience, how was I able to finally arrive at this place of ease and flow? And also what was in contrast to the way I'd been living my life, which was just like gripping and trying to control everything and being so attached to doing what everyone else told me I should be doing, assuming everyone else knew better than me. So that was very not surrendered. And so for me, surrender feels like the logical, whenever I want to move forward in anything, surrender is kind of like not just the logical, but also the mental, emotional, spiritual first step. But what I also realized is it's really challenging to surrender when we're still holding on to so many things, whether those are relationships, ideas, beliefs, even physical stuff. So the reason I paired surrender and release together is because they're super complementary. The release, the letting things go, the doing the forgiveness work, or, you know, even just cleaning out your friggin' closet, getting some new fresh space in your house, clearing out the energy of a place or yourself, creates the space to be able to actually surrender.
What do you think actually gets in the way of people surrendering?
Like so many things that you and I talk about, it's not been modeled for us. Like, who has a role model? Who grew up with someone in their life? Maybe a handful of people, but it's not the majority who did it. No. We grew up because, you know, again, not again, I haven't said this on the show. I say again because I talk about this all the time in life. I'm like, again, from the 17 times I've thought about this in the past 24 hours. But first time here, we all grew up in this patriarchal culture. That's like crumbling and disassembling before our very eyes, which is cool. Still a ways to go. But the constructs around that are largely about taking big, massive action, moving forward, following the rules, whether those rules were dictated by your family of origin, your religion, your schooling, the culture, whatever. And so we just don't know how. We don't know how because we haven't seen it in action.
Right. And from a therapeutic point of view, if we think about surrender and releasing, so many of us are operating on it is the kid within us that is still sort of, driving the bus of our lives. And so a child or a child's fear, surrendering would be like the last thing you want to do because you feel like you can do more. You should do more to create the outcome you want. And so many in both of our communities are women who are overfunctioners and perfectionists and doing way, way, way more than their share of everything for everyone. And so surrendering for many in my demographic is really counterintuitive to their like success model that they've had going for all of these years. And yet it's something that when you do get it, it creates the most psychological shifts because they never thought it was even possible to allow rather than do more.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is surrender is an action. So, and also this comes up on my workshops a lot and in my groups. Surrender is not waving the white flag.
Yes, it's not giving up, and making that distinction is really important. I'm glad you said it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not about giving up. It's about getting out of your own way. It's about letting all of the forces in life and all of the people that want to support you, giving them the space to show up and support you. It's about allowing things to be easy, or even just opening your eyes, taking off those glasses that only see the struggle is real, it's challenging, work harder, do more. Taking that off for a minute and going, oh, there could be a better way. So sometimes surrender is just actually about zooming out and being available for more options, for more solutions, and also being able to actually even see when an opportunity or a solution is presenting itself, so that you can say yes to it. When we have our blinders on and all of our needs to be right compounding on us about this is the way it is, this is how it should be, I'm the kind of person who ... A friend of mine once said this amazing thing, how, people who want to be like, well, you don't understand, or this is just how it is. That's like sitting in a cage holding the key yourself.
Mm-hmm. But there's something comforting about the devil and I do think that it's challenging to have some kind of faith or take the leap in some way to do something different, even about the things that we complain about. So what you described and you coming to your own surrender and release was like hitting a tipping point where it's like the pain of the not knowing, or the pain of doing the same crap that was not fulfilling you, or the pain of the unknown really outweighed, right? Like you were willing to be in that uncomfortable or that discomfort and ask for help and really surrender yourself to guidance, basically is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
But usually that's like a point I think that people hit.
Yeah. And here's the cool thing. You don't have to get to the point to where you're beaten into submission here. What you can do is, if you look around in your life and there's even mild satisfaction in any of the major life categories, which I classify them pretty much as like health and body, self-care, your mental, emotional wellness, all that stuff, your career, your money situation, your relationships. And, there's a bunch of different types of relationships. Your friends and family, your friends are different, family's different, immediate family might be different from extended. You guys get the point. Mm-hmm. Your environment and your lifestyle, like your actual home environment, your interests, all these things kind of make you into who you are. If there's even mild dissatisfaction in any of those categories, you can bet that it's affecting all of the other ones. So before you even have to get to the point like me, like I recently have decided I've graduated from being someone who needs to learn things the hard way. I would prefer for it not to be that way anymore. So I personally communicate with God. Yours might be the universe or source or, whatever the hell you call it. Right. Whatever it is, I've been like, hey, I would like to make an agreement here that I don't need cosmic 2x4s anymore. Mm-hmm. So that would be my preference. You still do what you do. I'll still do what I do. And hopefully we can work that out. But the thing that I've noticed is helpful and maybe a little preemptive is curiosity. Even when, if on a scale of 1 to 10, this particular area of your life, instead of a 10, it's like a 5. Mm-hmm. Maybe you go, oh, okay. I would like this to be more like 7, 8, maybe even a 10. Let me get curious. Like, even that's a surrender. Again, just like that. And I even did it with my body language because I know we can see each other. I know some people are probably listening and don't see me, but I even lean back. When I say surrender, I lean back with my body. Because not like the control, the gripping, the attachment, the like needing things to be the way you think they should be is such a like it's so forward, so penetrating, so grippy, you know?
It's funny, in my own life, in my own journey of this, it really took me getting diagnosed with cancer to be in any state of surrender, because my entire winning formula had just been forward motion, just cramming it through, doing inhuman things, working inhuman hours, and doing, being massively successful at being high functioning codependent. I was like, I had mastered the art of it, but at the expense of my own wellness.
Yeah.
And in getting a diagnosis, it was like the universe was like, hey, I was tapping you on the shoulder. I was gently whispering in your ear and blowing in your hair, Terri, for you to hear me, but you didn't. And finally, I just needed to throw you down a flight of stairs to really force you into a state of surrender. And when the things that I thought would happen didn't happen, meaning that the world would stop spinning on its axis if I weren't able to overfunction my ass off in every relationship in my life and running the talent agency, I was all the things that I was doing. The perspective shift is not just what felt so good about surrendering, because it was a relief. It was like I could exhale for the first time in my life to a degree. But it was also the realization that we are all, like I say in one of my meditations, like, you get abducted by aliens right now. You know what's going to happen tomorrow? The sun is still going to come up.
Yeah.
Right? And we feel so like, in one way, irreplaceable, not negatively necessarily, but when you feel so over responsible for everything, there is something, for me, it was liberating to feel like, oh yeah, this whole thing that's been going on for millions of years before I was on it is going to be going on for probably millions of years after I get off it, regardless. Totally. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think forgiveness plays into the surrender and release process?
It's so good. So, I'm sure people on your podcast have heard people say this before, but like forgiveness is for the forgiver. Yeah. So kind of like surrender, where a lot of people resist surrender because they think it means giving up, waving the white flag. Mm-hmm. A lot of people resist forgiveness because they think it means having to get okay with crappy things that have happened or that people have done, or like forgiving people's bad behavior. It's not about that. I view it as taking your energy back from all these situations where you're still just giving it your energy and your power, right? Something that happened however long ago, or this person that for whatever reason is still in your life or whatever. And so where the forgiveness comes in is forgiveness is part of release. We are releasing the mental, emotional attachment to something that has already happened, that has come and gone, and is not helping us move forward. And there's layers and levels and, levels of intensity to forgiveness. Like if someone has some serious trauma, your forgiveness might take years, and it might require professional help. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you're not working with fresh or unresolved trauma, practice like a ho'oponopono, which is something I teach my women, or some of our like guided prayers and meditations that work. Because it's layers and layers and layers. I think one of the things people don't realize about forgiveness, it's not just like saying, oh, I forgive you. Do you forgive me? I forgive you. Yes. Okay. No. It's like you have to forgive the person. Sometimes you have to forgive everyone involved that like somehow contributed. You have to forgive life for even being a way that allows for things like this to happen. Yep. Some of these very nonsensical things that you're like, things like that should not happen to a person. And then you have to forgive yourself often for the role you played, whether it was because you put yourself in a vulnerable situation, or often so much of the forgiveness a lot of people have to do comes from their childhood, obviously, as you know. And it's like you literally just have to forgive yourself for not knowing any better. Because like we've put pressure on ourselves, like how like something happened to you when you were 4. How the hell could a 4-year-old have done anything differently or known any better? Right. But you've spent your whole life blaming yourself for things, right? Yeah. So a lot of the forgiveness work is around stopping blaming yourself for stuff. And again, it creates mental and emotional space, to consider things differently, to allow in love, to allow in support, to be kinder and more gentle with yourself. And until you actually do it, you can't possibly imagine the impact that it will have on frigging everything in your life.
Yes, that is so true. I also think, and you and I have talked about this before, that there's this underlying thing with forgiveness that and a lot of times it's unconscious, where people unconsciously believe that not forgiving, like, means they don't have to let that person go, even if that person has wronged them, even if they know the person is toxic for them, even if it's whatever it is, that it's a way to still stay actively connected to someone. But when you realize, like you're talking about, the cost for staying connected is all that internal space and all of that energy. And I love the idea of, this being in sort of the release area, because forgiveness has gotten such a bad name, as you had said before, where it's like as if forgiveness and condoning someone else's shitty behavior are synonymous, which they're not. And what you're really doing is just releasing yourself from resentment prison, which is basically sucking up all your prana and your life force energy. And it's a way of giving yourself this gift of, because here's the thing, we can also be smart, right? You can forgive someone and also be like, and hey, P.S., I still don't want you in my life. And I'm still blocking you on social media. And I still have no interest in having any more interaction with you,
Yeah. Forgiveness does not mean tolerance. It's simple acceptance and coming to a more peaceful place with what has happened. So I've seen some really amazing over the years. I was in a bathroom at the Integratron in Joshua Tree, California. And there was this little quote in a frame on the counter that said, "Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past."
I've read that before and I love it. It's so good.
I love that. And in Sue Monk Kidd's book, Dance of the Dissident Daughter, she made a distinction I never thought of before. This goes to what I was saying earlier about forgiveness happening in stages and layers. She's like, you've really forgiven when you no longer have any need to retaliate. Or like stick it to someone. And for me personally, at the time of recording this, I'm 8 or 9 months out of a relationship. And for a while there, I really had to be very careful about who I was sharing what with, because there was still a desire in me to kind of like, not badmouth that person, but really like state my case for what happened,
Yep.
And, in the last couple months, I've come to the place where it's like, I actually don't even want to talk about it. Like I've caught myself catching up with friends who like wanted to know the scoop. And I'm like, I don't really need to talk about it anymore. Like that's the sign that like, I'm really over it, and it's not always that way. I'd be curious. This always happens on my show. Whenever I interview people who have their own shows, they ask me questions too. And I'm about to do that to you. I've been really, probably since my last breakup, more present to the relationship between anger and forgiveness, because there is a readiness factor. We're not always ready to forgive. And I find the number one reason why we're not ready is because we're really pissed. So we're not in the like compassion and letting go place yet. We actually have to express the anger. What do you think of that?
I think that's really valid. And I think that part of the whole process and the therapeutic process is, one thing I always have clients do is write a letter to this person, even if you're never sending it, even if the person's dead, because honoring that anger, that visceral, whether it's a sense of unfairness or betrayal or whatever it is that happened, that when people, a lot of times when I'll tell clients in the beginning, I'll be like, okay, so we're going to write a letter to your grandfather who abused you or whatever it is. And they're like, either that makes no sense because he's dead, or that makes no sense if he's alive because I'm not going to send it, or if I did send it, it wouldn't change anything. And the whole point is understanding what is your side of the street in this type of interaction, where if you still feel very charged, then your side of the street isn't clean, and there's no judgment about it, right? What that's telling you is that there's something you need to do. There's something that needs your attention. And this is what this is all it is. It's like a little call to action within yourself, that if you're still angry, because what you said before about it being much easier to release when you are not, when you're not feeling that active anger anymore, then there is no need to like get someone on your side or to be like, yeah, we broke up, but he was a jerk, or even in a friendship type situation, still stating your case or dropping little bombs of, yeah, well, she's like that, or whatever it is. Because if you've really worked it through, you don't need to bring attention to that any longer, because it doesn't do anything for you. Once the anger is processed, there's no more satisfaction in talking about it.
Totally.
That's a good theory. I like it.
Thanks. And, I also think, to touch on something that I've learned from you, the term repeating realities, when you're not fully through something, I always, this is the analogy or metaphor I use. I guess analogies are metaphors, right? Mm-hmm. I think of a guitar string where like you could pluck that guitar string anywhere on the string and it's going to reverberate the whole thing. So if I haven't forgiven someone, or if I'm still pissed off at someone for something and I haven't moved through it, anything that anyone else does that plucks that guitar string that even feels remotely similar is going to send me off. And that alone is the incentive I need to clean up my side of the street. It doesn't even have to do with the other person or the thing that happened or letting them go. It has more to do with, I want to enjoy my life. I don't want to be friggin' triggered all the time by anything even remotely similar to that experience or that reminds me of it.
It's so true. What you're describing, right, is a transference. And I like to say, now is not then. And the full impact of when you're feeling sensitive and it's about a betrayal, let's say, and if someone does something that if you weren't feeling sensitive about that, the original injury right there, you might not flip off or go off the handle, like you said, and there's no clarity in why am I feeling so mad. And I always will say, whether it's in a group or whether it's to clients, the level of your response, the intensity of that response, when it's someone who you don't love, but the intensity of your response is like super, super deep, that is your indication to know, wow, this is definitely about something else that is similar. And, in asking the 3 Qs, like we do all the time in everything we do in life together and apart, which is, who does this person remind me of? Why is this behavioral dynamic familiar to me, and where have I felt like this before? Being those 3 Qs that you can really apply to almost anything if you feel funky. Yeah,
they always work. You're like, oh.
Right. You're like, wow, I can just ask those questions. So I want to move into the next part of Wild Soul Movement. Wait, you know what? Your mic is brushing up against your boob, probably.
And probably, because they're huge.
They are, and lovely, but we don't want to hear that, whatever the hell it is. Great. So I want to move into the next thing, which is trust and receiving. So this is the next sort of, I don't know, what do you call them? Quadrants in your
topics, modules.
Yeah, modules. So trust and receiving. So what does this start with?
So, in Wild Soul Movement, we use 3 things: meditation, movement, and mantras. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of each, I'll call it a module. And I've been vacillating between topic and module for all 3 years that it's been out. It doesn't really matter. I always begin with safety. The first mantra of a topic is always, it is safe for me to ... Mm-hmm. Because so many of the reasons why people resist things is because they don't feel safe.
Yep.
And so trust is it's huge. So this begins with, it is safe for me to trust, and doing whatever work needs to be done around. And again, it doesn't need to be 100% safe. No, but maybe it's just 1% more safe, so that you can begin to trust a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And then add a little 1%, and then add a little 1%. And again, notice categorically, okay, I do feel safe to trust in this area or this relationship. Or, I really trust myself. A lot of my women, I would imagine yours are probably similar, the overfunctioning crowd, mm-hmm. is like, oh, I totally trust myself at work. I'm badass there. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to a relationship or this or that scenario or setting a boundary with my mom, yikes.
Yep. I think that the whole thing with self-trust is that I used to love to say, how you do anything is how you do everything. And then I became a psychotherapist and realized, I mean, sometimes that's true, meaning working hard and all of that, but it's not about that. It's about, why is it difficult? Like, what is it very specific to the person? What is their repeating reality? What are the three cues that they need to answer, whatever it is, to understand why they're not figuring it out in a relationship? And there's many reasons why we don't trust ourselves. So let's just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
That family of origin, childhood stuff. What do you find with the groups that you run, why people don't trust themselves?
Well, we have a journal that goes with the program in Wild Soul Movement too. And one of the questions is, where did you learn that it wasn't safe to trust? I mean, me personally, it was explicit in my family. I would leave the house. I spent a lot of time with my grandpa when I was little. He'd always be like, hey, what do I always tell you? Like, literally before I walk out the door, almost every single time. Hey, what do I always tell you? And I'm like, I know, Pop, don't trust anybody. Like,
oh my God.
It was like a freaking daily routine. Same with my dad's mom, my abuelita, same. Don't trust anybody. And I'm like, okay, got it. And so the problem with the word anybody is that includes me.
Yes.
So there's zero trust happening anywhere. I don't trust myself. I don't trust anyone. It breeds this suspicious personality. And when you're surrounded by people where nobody trusts each other or themselves, and like they're snooping on each other, this one's going through this one's pockets to see what's in there. Like, so that's my experience, but everyone learns it somewhere, whether it's explicit or implicit, by watching the behaviors modeled around you.
Absolutely. And another thing that happens from a therapeutic point of view, if you're in a dysfunctional system, and P.S. who wasn't, it depends on the level of dysfunction, let's say. So in a family, like my family was a family where nothing was really, if it was negative, it was never talked about. So if something happened the night before, like you'd wake up the next day and it would be like business as usual. Who wants an over easy egg? You know what I mean? Like have oatmeal and brown sugar toast. Like, let's just act like life as usual. What happens though is that as a little kid, you realize that your perception, you're perceiving that something's wrong. And then you end up having to look at everyone around you. We're looking to our parents, right? These are the people who we're learning things from in life, like how life is. And they're like, okay, see you at 3 after school. You're like, oh, okay. So you start disavowing what you feel because there's no affirmation from the adults in your life that something is wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. And so thank you for adding that distinction, because one of the things, in my practices, my own life, but in Wild Soul Movement, that's heavily incorporated in, is to be able to trust your body, because your body is communicating with you 24/7 through, I call it the unique language of the senses, your intuition, your instincts, your impulses, and there's a little nuance between all of them. Some are present in the mind, some are present in the heart, some are more gut feelings, and it's different for everyone. Those things are speaking to you. So if you will just take the time, this is why it's called Wild Soul Movement, like Wild Soul is like my version of your higher self, right? My book is called Untame Yourself. When we become tame, we basically shut off our access to all of our own internal signals. It doesn't mean they stop happening. It just means we don't know how to read them and we don't listen to them. So part of this self-trust is being able to notice, what do I feel and where do I feel it? Like when you get into a situation, and I interviewed someone for my podcast recently named Elliot Hulse. I love this when someone says something so subtle and you're like, oh, because I talk all the time about the difference between judgment and discernment, because trust and discernment are siblings.
Yep.
Right? When I can trust myself, I notice when I'm being discerning. So judgment occurs in the mind. It's our mind that wants to place value on things. That's good or bad. That's right or wrong.
Yep.
Better or worse, all these things. But our body knows. So if I walk into a situation and I physically feel some kind of discomfort, I'm not judging the situation. My discernment is going, something's going on here. Pay attention. So a lot of the trust, to make it really tangible and not even so like esoteric or like overly spiritual or bypassy at all, is what is the real, tangible, physical experience you're having in your body right now, and what does that mean to you?
Right. It's so interesting that you say this because the physical part of it, from being a therapist for so many years, I would say, we're going to uncover your gut eventually
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
when they first come out and say, well, what does your gut instinct say? And so much of the time women would say, I really don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And if you're in a state of anxiety a lot, if you are in fight, flight, or freeze a lot because of all this overfunction, because of all this childhood stuff that's unresolved, it's easy to not know what your gut instinct is saying. And again, like you said before, you need this space, the expansion, the deep breath, the dialing into your physical stuff, which is what I love so much about the work that you do, and actually has helped me so much. Like you've given me things which I've done, but for me, you did one when you were here that I've been using to just tap into my own body wisdom, because it's so easy, even when you do this work, and I've had 30 years of therapy, to forget about your body. I had a client once who had a lot of weight issues, and when I said to her, well, describe how you feel, in your body, she said, oh, well, I never feel like I'm in my body. My body is an appendage that I must drag around behind me. I was like, wow, okay. So we need to do work about integrating mind, body in with this person. But there's something that's so, the body wisdom that's really in there. But what you're talking about is unlearning, and what you're doing in your program is basically teaching people how to sort of unlearn the stuff that made us ignore our bodies to begin with.
Totally. And I mean, let's talk about, as women, depending on if you grew up in any kind of religion or what was the belief system of your family, your body was demonized, sexualized, maybe taken advantage of, and it was really a big burden for a lot of people. It was not, most of us are not cultured into relating to our bodies as like this life creating, miracle making, gorgeous work of art that is so wise with so much information. And it's just an inconvenience. I used to say, it still stands, but I've edited it a little bit. The tagline for Wild Soul Movement actually used to be, get out of your head and into your body. But then I had to refine it a little bit, because I want you syncing up. I want you integrating, like you just said, mind and body. They are very complementary. We get the signals, we get the information, we get the intuition and the discernment from the body, that we can ping that up to the mind and go, cool, now what do we do with this? Now I actually can apply my logic and my rationale and my intellect in a useful and productive way than just straight up running from that place all the time without being informed by, my inner truth, wisdom, or whatever.
Right. And so what you're also saying is that it takes time.
Yeah. I mean, we spend our whole friggin' lives developing this dysfunctional relationship with ourselves, with trust, with our bodies. So it's not going to happen in 5 minutes that we're going to be like, oh, I love my body. I totally trust everything she's telling me right now, and I totally know what all the signals mean. Exactly.
You also, though, make a good point about that if you're from a dysfunctional system, which everyone was, and even if you weren't, you just the societal messages and the ingrained unconscious and conscious beliefs that we've all been fed about not being thin enough or fit enough or needing to look like a porn star or whatever those things are. And even if you don't want to look like a porn star, it's almost impossible not to have in some way internalized these messages about just not looking right in some way. And having some disgust or anger or whatever it is at the body.
Yeah.
So that keeps that disconnect going.
Big time. And I find that most people, again, this is why I'm so emphatic about breaking things down into categories, because most people are identifying everything equals the whole. So it's like, if my body isn't good enough, I'm not good enough. If I can't trust my body, I can't trust myself. We're over-identifying with all of these things instead of going, oh, okay, that's a challenge for me. But it doesn't determine my entire self-worth or identity or my whole personhood,
Right. So in Wild Soul Movement, you also talk about how to gather evidence and practice self-trust. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is something I learned. I learned this term from a mentor of mine, Jesse Elder, a couple years ago, which this is something I'd been doing. I love when someone names something and I'm like, oh, great, that's what you call that. Confidence comes from evidence. So many of us have gathered, because of, our past wounding, past experiences, whatever, all kinds of evidence that we can't trust. Kind of like, just to go back to my example, because friggin' some of the most influential adults in my life were telling me from a very young age, kind of like, hey, don't trust anyone ever under any circumstances. So when I believed that, I gathered plenty of evidence that I couldn't trust people. Once I started to turn that around several years ago and go, oh, not only can I trust myself, I can trust in the divine. I can actually trust in that, like, if anyone's ever read The Alchemist, there's a quote in there that goes along the lines of, like, at the moment of commitment, all of the universe conspires to assist you. Well, if I trust in that, and I first heard that concept in my early 20s, and I'm like, so if I'm committed to something, life is actually working in my favor, I can begin to gather evidence that that is true. And it's literally just like you just upgraded your prescription, and now you have new eyeballs to see all around you all the time that, yes, in fact, you can trust. And sometimes we have to see other people doing it first.
Yep.
And go, oh, that person trusts themselves. This is why I'm so big. I think you and I are very similar in this, and I think this is why people enjoy when we get together so much. We're very much about doing the thing and also demonstrating it for others so they can see that it works.
Yep.
We're not just like pontificating. Nothing Terri and I ever talk about is shit that we haven't done and walked through and messed up and, recalibrated and practiced and practiced and practiced.
Yep.
So really finding the evidence. So confidence comes from evidence. We could be confident that we can't trust anything or anyone. We can move towards confidence that we can not necessarily trust everything and everyone, but be discerning. And that's about trusting yourself, right? I don't trust everyone. I'll meet people, and because I trust myself, I'm like, can't trust that mofo.
Yep. Totally agree. But now, because of the work that you've done and because of, it's obviously what you're teaching, it's like you can trust that gut instinct. I don't need that becomes now the evidence, which is so interesting, because in the beginning, when you're really honing your instincts again and being back dialed into your body wisdom, it's like we're looking for evidence that it's correct, sort of,
Yes,
or that
yes.
we can trust ourselves.
Yeah.
Once you get to that point and you're really working it on a daily basis, you don't need more info on that mofo.
No, you're good.
You just know that you had a hit. That's enough. Like, I don't need any proof other than that feeling.
Yeah.
That, like,
and that's
something's
practice.
uncool. Exactly.
Yeah. The practice is, well, now that I trust myself, I don't question it. I don't go back up into my mind and try to logic my way out of something. I just trust it. And what's interesting is I've charted this. So, and it's kind of like a scientific experiment. You gather the data, you gather the evidence, you evaluate the results. There have been a handful of people where I currently live at the time that we're recording this, where I got that hit. And this is where, you and I have both read Danielle LaPorte's new book, White Hot Truth. And one of the things she talks about is being like overly tolerant, compassionate to your own detriment, like turning it in on yourself. And so what I find during this process is that people who aren't discerning, people who don't trust themselves, are going to be very uncomfortable that you do and that you are. And they're going to want to turn it around on you and tell you you're being judgmental, tell you you're not being compassionate, because to them, with not being boundaried or being codependent or whatever it is, they're very uncomfortable with people standing in their truth because they're not willing or not able to do it. And so there were some people that I was like, nah, and it's challenging too when it's someone that like everyone else seems to like. Like, I'm just getting the hit. Like, this person isn't for me. And again, that's the difference between judgment and discernment. I'm not saying this person sucks. I'm just saying this person isn't for me. And so over the course of time, I've observed and I've watched and I've heard stories of this, and this. And I'm like, I was right. And the I was right isn't like a big told you so. It's just like validating that my gut was right for me.
Exactly.
Accurate is probably a better word than right.
Right. The right choice, though, for you, because that's all we can do. That's all we can do is be like, I'm the boss of me, And that's it. So what other people do, they do. And also, I mean, listen, not to be a therapist, but obviously we both know that people are endlessly playing out unresolved childhood wounds
Yeah.
in relationships. So you may not be doing that in that particular way, and that person doesn't hit some repeating reality for you, where with other people they do. And I can see it. I know friends who have very unhealthy moms, like really unhealthy, like in this space or in other spaces where I can see who they're drawn to, and I know exactly what they're playing out. But that's not for me to say, right?
Yeah.
The only thing for me to say is who I do and don't want to spend my very precious and limited time with. Like, who gets to be in the front row in my life? That's
Totally.
what my choice is, I want to move this into the next module, basically talk a little bit about wild dreaming and desire, like one of my favorite topics. So just let's break down your thoughts on the relationship between desires and dreams.
Yeah. Really quick before we do that, though, the other component to the trust is receiving, because it's nearly impossible to receive if you don't trust. Because if you're not trusting, you're not actually able to accept and fully receive.
Wait, that's great. Just stay there for 1 second. So did you guys hear that? If it's the truth, not trusting blocks you from being able to receive, whether it's someone doing something for you, even if it's a long-term relationship. Think of all the women. Think about someone who wants to do something for you sexually, even if it might take a long time. How many women are like, yeah, I'm good. Just, no, it's cool. Just, yeah, we're good. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Like, not allowing. And that limits your experience, your joy, and your ability to receive by not trusting. And I think that's a really brilliant distinction that you made, though, Elizabeth, about seeing that connection between not trusting and not receiving, even if you think you're receiving. When you think that you know better than the other person what they want to do, when you're like, no, that's an inconvenience for you, that's a pain, it's cool, I got it, I'll do it, no, don't grab my bags, person whose job it is to take my bags. I mean, that used to be me in my 20s. I'd be like, I got it. Why you got it? It's this guy's job and he would like you to tip him, which of course I would tip him anyway, even if I didn't let him carry the bags. But like, what is that? And of course, I mean, it's all training and whatever. It's that lack of trust, that anyone else can do it right. That was definitely part of my trauma. And that they want to do it, not wanting to be a burden.
Yeah. And so being willing to trust that if someone wants to help you, or if an opportunity is showing up for you, and this is what segues into wild dreams and desires, because there's the worthiness piece comes up in that. You totally deserve it. If it's happening, if it's in front of your face, if the offer is being made, you deserve it. And it's also not your business if the person means it or not. It's not your job to evaluate, oh, they're just saying that, they're just trying to be nice. Cool. Let them be nice.
Let them actually be nice.
Yeah.
Because
here's the other side of that coin is so many women pride ourselves on our ability to give and nurture and nourish. Well, guess what? If you can't receive fully, your giving is a little bit tainted, because there's something in you that's judging the recipients of your giving.
That's so true. Think about that. If you never let anyone do for you, but you're doing endlessly for others, it's almost like you're putting yourself in a superior position too. Like, well, I don't need what they have to give, but they definitely can't live without I'm given. They can't live without what I have, Yeah.
It's a really interesting talk about a dance, right? Between the trust and the receiving, and also giving and receiving and control.
So much.
It's fascinating. So to get back to your question about wild dreams and desires. So here's my theory on it. And I'm going to call it a theory because, I'm sure you can read some books where people will explain this differently. I don't really care. This is what I find is true for me and works really well for over 1,000 women who've gone through my program. So we've got a little data to support it. Desire is, and this is, can you, by the way, see how it all works together? The surrender and release happens to open up and create the space. And then the trust and the receiving happens so you could actually even be able to receive. Because great, you could be connecting with your desires and your dreams, but if you're not receptive, and if you can't surrender in the moments, and if you don't have the space for those desires and those dreams to even land, futile.
Right.
So I believe the desire is really, it's like that inkling from your soul that this is like a true thing that you want. that you deserve, that is on its way for you. And maybe it's just not a full blown, fully articulated, fully clear what it is, but the desire is like the seed that your soul plops into your awareness to go, hey, this needs to be on your radar, and it needs to be on your radar now. Where the dreaming comes in, and again, this is why a lot of, self-help demonizes the mind and the intellect. Your thoughts are bullshit. Your thoughts are lies. They're not. But you can choose them, and you can have more, make better choices, which is why we use mindfulness and wild soul movement. But this is where you get to use your intellect. You get to use your imagining faculty and blow the desire out of proportion so that you can actually open up the neural pathways in your mind to be available to even see the options and the opportunities and the choices to bring these desires and then the dreams to fruition. Does that make sense?
It does, but I want to add something to it. It makes total sense. What I was going to say about what I find is that there's a reluctance a lot of times with people in the beginning of this process, and especially with dreams, especially if you have things in life, like maybe you're married and have the house and the picket fence and the 2.2 kids, and maybe that's happened, and yet maybe you still have desires and dreams that are in there. And I find that it can be very threatening for some people to even admit that they want what they want, that they have a desire for something, whatever it may be. And I would always say, like, well, how can we manifest it if you're afraid to even admit that you want it? Like, you got to get real. And that's some diving deep within yourself to understanding, why do I feel bad about what it is that I want? Is it being raised a particular way? Vic and I used to always have this conversation about money. Well, when we first met, and he's a recovering Catholic, I call him, right? And I grew up Protestant.
Me too.
It's very not like Catholicism at all, in the way that you don't have all those rules and regulations. We don't talk about original sin. There's all these things that don't exist. So religion to me was a kind of a good experience. It was like, oh, this is nice, but and nothing so terrifyingly scary, And Vic would say, nobody needs more than $250,000 a year. And I was like, really? Because probably right about now, we actually need more than $250,000. We were raising 3 kids. They were going to college. And I said to him, that's the weirdest thing to say. So I want to really unpack why you would put a cap or a ceiling on our abundance. What is your association? What is it? Is it greed? Is it gluttony? What is your fear? And, eventually we got to really unpacking that it really was, if you have a desire for that. I said, but babe, making the distinction that I was like, we're going to make all the money in the world. I want to make all the money in the world so that I can do good works. So that I can help more people. I don't want it because I don't want to buy a friggin' Hummer or a Birkin bag. And hey, no judgment if you got a Birkin bag, great. But do you know what I mean? I'm not can't wait to get all the money in the world so I can have a gold toilet. It's whatever your intention is, right? Money is just freedom to do good works. I was like,
totally.
And
it comes back to the trust piece, right? Because when you trust yourself, that it's not going to go to your head. Having more just means that you can give more. The more I have, the more I can share. I struggled with money for many years. And finally, when I heard that phrase, the more I have, the more I can share, I was like, oh, great. Because I wasn't super motivated by money. I'm like, I just need slightly, and again, there I was limiting myself with slightly. I just want more than enough. I don't need all the money in the world. If it comes that way, great. But I'm just going to use it. The prayer I say every day is use me, move me, make me a force for expansion, for love, and for good. So I trust myself. No matter how much money I make, I'm going to do good things with it. I'm going to help people. I'm not going to be like this miser sitting up in my mansion in Malibu on a hill, screw everybody else. No. I'm going to do good things, and I trust myself. And I know that I also, this comes to, for the people listening, I know I have a lot of entrepreneurial women in my community, and I know you do too, or people who help or in leadership positions. And I think people can be nervous about getting that kind of power, especially women. We're not really taught to be comfortable with our power. And a lot of our relationships to power, we've learned from what we've seen modeled for us, which is a lot of power is like money and greed. And, even if we're in the US right now, the type of leadership is like narcissistic, tyrannical, all these things. And so we're like, well, what happens when I become a powerful person? Like things like money, things like your dreams coming true, things like getting into your power, it's just going to amplify more of who you actually are. So if you're a good person, you're just going to be more able to be a good person.
Yes, exactly. And again, that goes back to trusting yourself.
Yeah.
Like when you have a solid sense of self through these practices that you're talking about, you know who you are.
Yep.
With all the money in the world and with no money.
Totally.
You really know who you are. So I want to talk a little bit more about, so with Wild Soul Movement, there's a community piece. There's a tribe piece. And I had like tribe envy, and then you helped me start my own tribe. Thank you. And not even envy. I'm kidding. But what I really had, it was like tribe goals is what I really should have said, because that was the feeling of this connectedness. And how do you see the tribe element with the course that you have? How does that come into play with people's growth and their transformation?
What's so amazing is, for all the years that I've done my own work, personal development, growth, spirituality, I do a lot of work my own. I do a lot of like studying and contemplating, but nothing is like being able to have another person or a group of people to bounce things off of and to see things at play within. And not to mention, we love Brene Brown because she has brought vulnerability into the mainstream. But one of the number one aspects of dissolving shame and guilt and fear and all this wounding, all these very vulnerable things, our traumas, is to bring it to the light, is to be witnessed and to be held. So, in our community, and I know you know this because I helped with your guidelines, or like the boundaries we have about how people can show up and share. They have to ask for feedback if they want it. We don't give unsolicited feedback. This way sometimes people could just share. People can say, I just need a witness. I just need to be seen. Or am I the only one? Or here's what I'm looking for. Here's what I need. And then also we have so many brilliant women. Women come into my communities with these vast life experiences, with these deep life experiences. They're like, I've never talked to anyone about this before. And they're getting more support than they've ever received from essentially what's like, I'm doing air quotes if you're listening and not watching, a group of strangers on the internet. But in some cases, because it's a group of strangers, is why people don't have any attachment to you. They don't need you to be who you were yesterday because they didn't have a relationship to you yesterday. So there's a really amazing aspect to coming into a community of people that's not really familiar with your past, because they're not treating you like the victim of anything. Right. They're treating you as the empowered person showing up now and moving forward and having a desire to heal or, whatever it is. It's so amazing. And I think of some of the things that come up, even the things that are not necessarily part of Wild Soul Movement, but everything is tangentially related to surrender and release, trust and receiving, wild dreaming and desire and love and creation. Like everything falls under those categories. So women talk about miscarriages. They talk about relationship patterns and struggles and things like that. They health issues, right? And I'll moderate rather. Like if people are giving advice that I don't necessarily agree with, I'll just be like, hey, always in there to make sure to remind people, how does this feel to you? Make sure you're coming back to tuning in with your own inner discernment. Or like, here's my 2 cents, but listen, just because I'm the leader of the group doesn't mean I'm right. I remind people of that all the time. Danielle Laporte and I talked about this when I had her on the podcast about the responsibility of being a tribe leader.
Yep.
And it's like, people are going to put you on a pedestal, but it comes back to the trust too. I'm never going to abuse that power. I'm just not going to. That's not what I'm here for. The core of Wild Soul Movement is everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you. So people will project all the great things in themselves onto me. You're amazing. You're this, you're that. And I'm like, great. If you spot it, you got it. Right. So thank you for seeing yourself reflected in all these things that you love about me. And like, let's remember that it's you too.
Exactly. But it's great because it's sort of being on a path together, because even though you're ahead of it, you're, as you said before, both of us really work from the point of view of like, we've had these experiences.
Yeah.
This is what was helpful for me, or this is what I realized myself when I was in that situation. And again, even as a psychotherapist for 2 decades, I do not propose to like have the answers for other people because we're all so incredibly different. But I do know that support and basically diving into these four modules that you've created, it really sort of covers the gamut of all of life, of all of the things that women are really dealing with and do deal with. And so much of what it is that you teach in this group is about breaking down the barriers to creating the life that you want, to having the internal experience that you want. And that really, I firmly agree with you that all of the, what you need is inside.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need a great coach who has really good GPS to help you find where it is within you.
Totally. Yeah. And what I love too is, you know, people have blind spots. They can't always see their own stuff. And when someone comes along and shares something that happened to their own story, and people can go, oh, me too. Like that me too element. I'm not the only person. I'm not the worst person in the world because ... Like I recently had an interview with a woman named Bethany Webster. We talked about the mother wound, and it's a very real experience that some people have to cut their own mother out of their life for whatever reason, and the guilt that goes along with that. So when this podcast episode came up, one of the women came into the Wild Soul Movement, the member group, and she just shared how it's been a couple years now that she cut her mom out of her life, and she had so much guilt that she was a bad person. She'd received so much unsolicited feedback and input from people being like, but that's your mother. But like, if your mother is the most abusive person in your life, maybe she doesn't get to be in your life. She shared her story, and there were at least 6 other women who were like, oh, me too. Oh my God, thank you so much for sharing this. Oh my God, I'm crying right along with you. Yes, that point hit home for me too. And people realizing like, you're not on an island. You're not an asshole. And thank God you shared. There's so much. It's not just validation, but it's empowering. It's usefulness. It's like, this matters. Like, my story helped another person. And it just keeps incentivizing people to grow and to share and to not freaking hide. Women have been hiding and suppressing and shrinking and pretending and settling for freaking long enough. Not on my watch.
I will agree with that. So if someone is interested in like when is your next thing coming? When is your next?
Wild Soul Movement is open for enrollment from July 7th to August 4th. If you're listening to this in real time in 2014, and we have a
2017.
Did I say 2014?
You did.
Because that's the year it came out.
Oh
that
my
was
God,
the first year I launched it. That is
Okay.
so funny. 2017, you guys.
Okay, great. We're in 2017.
Okay, just in case, July 7th to August 4th, 2017. And for those of you that are listening to this podcast, we have a special link for you. It's wildsoulmovement.com/Terri, Terri, because Terri's awesome. And so we made our special link.
You're the best. I'm so excited for this next round of learning and sharing and growing. It's just the tribe just gets bigger and bigger and better and better. So right on. And if anyone has any questions, where can they about it? They could just go to your website, or I mean, we'll this will all be provided on obviously where the podcast is and where the website is. But
they can, but also you and I are going to do a webinar, so they might as well just come to our webinar and ask their damn questions in real life and get them answered.
Oh, how we love to jam on a webinar. So yes.
Oh my God.
Bring your
just come
questions.
hang out with us more.
I love
it's like
it.
hanging out with your 2 favorite New Jersey, East Coast, Staten Island girlfriends.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, and we'll give you the link for that too. You can go to wildsoulmovement.com / we'll do T as in Terry, C as in Cole webinar. And that'll take you to the sign up link to get on Terri's webinar. And you know what? I don't have it in front of me right now, but I could pull it up. When that webinar is. Do you remember?
Yeah, hold on. I think it's right in this thing that I do have open. Hold on. Recording day. We're looking. Yes,
Yep,
webinar, July 26th.
Got it. At noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's our webinar. It will be recorded. It'll stay up all the way through August 4th. So even if you can't make it live, register for that thing. Again, the link for that's wildsoulmovement.com / TC webinar. And here's what we'll do. A lot of the stuff that we just talked about, we'll just dive deeper and we'll go more specific for the people who show up. And even if you can't show up, if there is something that you listened to or you heard me say or you heard Terri say in this podcast and you're like, oh, I want to know this, this, and this about that, like send us your question. We'll answer it on the webinar. We love, like, obviously we could geek out forever and we also really love each other. So any excuse to spend more time, we're all about it.
I love it. So there'll be every single question on the webinar. Any question you have personally about any of the things we talked about and any of the things we will talk about, Elizabeth and I will answer personally right then in live time. So that's pretty exciting. So you can send it before or come on live and we'll be doing it that way as well.
Yeah. And here's the other thing. If you do have any other just like miscellaneous questions, you don't want to come to the webinar, we'll put a link to the Facebook group as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth DiAlto, my wild soul friend.
Thank you. You are the best.
This was super, super awesome. And we're going to do it again really soon for our webinar. Can't wait.
Bye.
Bye.